In this screencast, we're going to talk about the cell cycle and how it's related to cancer. This image is a picture of a breast cancer cell, and the month of October is dedicated to breast cancer awareness. It's one of the most, the leading killers of women. It's one of the top 4 types of cancer. So let's talk a little bit about why cancers arise and how they're related to the cell cycle. Okay, so normally, let's say I've got a bunch of skin cells and I'm growing them on a plate, and those skin cells will anchor to the bottom of the plate and then they'll start to divide. And they will divide because when they sense that they're not touching other skin cells, a gene called a Proto-Oncogene will turn on and it will signal to the cell, start dividing. There's not enough cells around. Okay? Once those cells have divided and covered the bottom of that plate, since they're skin cells, they'll realize, okay, we have covered this plate now. We need to stop dividing because you don't want skin cells to keep dividing and divide on top of each other. So another gene will get activated. This gene is called a tumor suppressor gene. In other words, it's going to suppress tumors by telling cells, you don't need to divide. Stop dividing. You're good. Okay, so you can imagine what happens is when we get problems in the expression of genes. Like if a proto-oncogene is overexpressed, it becomes an oncogene. Oncogenes cause cancer. Or if we have a tumor suppressor gene that is not turned on properly, that could also cause cancer. You could imagine this is like a truck going down a hill, right? Well, 2 things can cause that truck to go fast. Number 1, they can have their foot, the guy can have his foot on the gas pedal. That's going to cause that truck to go fast. The second thing is, if the truck's going too fast, he can put on the brakes to slow it down. So proto-oncogenes are like the gas pedal. They cause cells to divide. Tumor suppressor genes are like the brakes. They stop cells from dividing so that they stay in manageable numbers. But if we get mutations in these 2 genes that regulate the cell cycle, instead of having a normal skin cell where we have cells that have covered the whole area of the skin and then stop, we'll have these piles of things called tumors building up. And a tumor is when these cells just keep dividing and dividing on top of each other and dividing and dividing. And they can even signal to blood vessels to grow to them and feed them blood and glucose and nutrients. And they can actually take nutrients away from other cells. And then if they accumulate other mutations, they can break off and spread around the body and metastasize and grow in those places. And that's when you're in that stage 4 stage 4 cancer, and that's when you're going to die of cancer. So it's a multi-step process, but let's talk about how that happens. First off, you may have if you're a woman and you're in your mid-30s, you have to start doing breast exams. If you're a man in your mid-30s, you have to start doing testicular exams because testicular cancer strikes when you're very young. Okay, so once you feel that lump, that means that there is, if it's cancerous, it means that there are cells dividing too fast. So if we look at that, that first tumor could be growing but not necessarily able to spread. Or it could be what we call malignant. If it's malignant, that means it will continue to grow very aggressively and even be able to break off and spread, spreading either through the lymph nodes, or it can spread through blood vessels to other parts of the body and grow there. So the problem with cancers is they'll oftentimes start off as what's called benign or non-lethal tumors, but then again, further mutations in these cells and these genes that regulate cell division and regulate the ability of cells to break off and move will occur, and then they'll develop into malignant and deadly cancers. Okay, so let's look at an example of that in colon cancer. So within colon cancer, we have normal colon tissue here, and there's a gene that's preventing these cells from dividing. It's called a tumor suppressor gene, APC. If we get a loss or that gene no longer functions, then these cells will start to divide too rapidly and will develop what's called a polyp. And when I was a kid, the president was Ronald Reagan, and it seemed like every month or 2 he was going in and having these polyps removed from his colon. But they always said, don't worry, it's not cancer. They're these benign growths on his colon. And that's basically what these are. So one mutation, we have a benign growth in the colon. Okay. But again, over time, and people live very long, right? We live 70, 80, 90 years. You develop more mutations, right? Like let's say we have now an activation of a ROS oncogene. that's the gas pedal. That's something that's going to cause more cell divisions. And then another gene that prevents cells from dividing, loss of another tumor suppressor gene. Well, now we're at like stage 2 cancer. Now we have something that's growing more aggressively. It's a faster growing cancer, and that's more serious. You might have to treat that more aggressively than this initial benign polyp, right? Well, then if that doesn't get treated or that doesn't get taken care of, we might get further mutations. So now we have a loss of another tumor suppressor gene, P53, and then additional mutations that allow these cells to break off and spread. And now we have stage 4 cancer. Now we have a malignant carcinoma. You can see these cells are starting to migrate around to other tissue and spread to, bones or spleen or lungs and things like that. Now we have a really deadly cancer. So again, the cell cycle is carefully regulated by genes that produce proteins associated with cell division. But when we get mutations in those genes, those develop in cancer. And we know things like cigarette smoke, carcinogens can cause damage to those genes. We know that UV rays can damage the genes in our skin and cause our skin cells to divide out of control. We know that X-ray radiation and other forms of radiation can damage our cells and cause them to become cancerous. So we're more and more aware of things in our environment that can damage our cells and cause cancer. But other things cause cancer. Viruses can actually cause cancer. Cervical cancer is caused by the human papillovirus. The good news about that is they've developed an vaccine where they can actually vaccinate women. In Louisiana, they actually mandate a vaccine for girls so they don't develop cervical cancer. Other cancers are genetic. You actually inherit genes. There's a gene called the BRCA gene, which will increase a woman's chance of getting breast cancer. So we're learning a lot more about how we get cancer, and cancer awareness has grown significantly from 100 years ago when people didn't know anything about carcinogens and cancers and all these factors. So hopefully in the future we'll be able to start to really deal with these factors and bring down cancer rates in this country. So this is just an overview about cancer.